Okay, this is David Zierler, Director of the Caltech Heritage Project. It is Tuesday, March 1st, 2022. I'm delighted to be here with Matthew Wallace of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Matt, it's great to be with you. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Matt, to start, would you tell me, please, your affiliation and title at JPL?
Yeah, I am the Deputy Director for Planetary Sciences at JPL, and I've been in that role now for about 8 months or so.
To give a broader sense of where planetary science fits in administratively at JPL, what's the overall structure and where is planetary science in that?
So there's a number of different directorates, essentially, that the laboratory is organized into, including uh, uh, heliophysics. There's engineering and sciences directorate. There's mission assurance. There's a number of different sort of stovepipe directorates. And Planetary Sciences is the directorate that's responsible essentially for running the missions that go to the different solar system bodies, the different planets, as well as things like asteroids and that sort of thing. We're about probably about 60% of the laboratory business. That's what JPL is kind of known for. It's planetary missions. And of course, part of that is the Mars program, which I spent a lot of time on.
And then in the org structure, obviously you would report to the director for planetary science. What are the steps between the director and the director of JPL as a whole?
The director of the Planetary Sciences Directorate reports directly to the laboratory director. Yeah.
And on that point, all of the excitement surrounding Lori Leshin coming in, I wonder what you think this means for the lab, some new directions it might take under her leadership.
I think it's terrific. I'm really excited. It's always good to see some turnover, I think, and new ideas and approaches. Mike represented that. Mike Watkins represented that when he came in after Charles' stint, and I think Lori, will do the same. I do think we have a very strong leadership team at the laboratory right now. It's a team with a lot of experience in running these programs and these missions. And so I think Lori coming in, out of academia, from a science, background, is a perfect complementary addition to the leadership at the management level. And so I'm excited. I had known her a bit here and there because of my time in the Mars program, and I had a chance to speak with her for a while last week. I think it's really exciting. I told her she did a town hall, for the lab and for the laboratory a couple weeks ago. And I happened to be in the car listening to it with my 18-year-old daughter, and and it was really pretty inspirational. I told my daughter this is the first female laboratory director that we've ever had. We've never even had a deputy laboratory director that's a female. And my daughter turned to me and said, it is. You do know that it's 2022, right? I mean, so I think it's terrific. I think she's going to be great, and I'm looking forward to it.
Matt, what are some of the most exciting things happening at JPL that are really going to give a boost to Lori's leadership right from the beginning? Things for her to build on that already have real momentum.
Well, there's some fantastic upcoming missions, in the planetary sciences area where I work. For instance, we're getting ready to launch a mission called Psyche to an asteroid, which is, help us understand the history of that particular body. We're about 2.5 years away from launching a big flagship mission to Europa, which is a moon of Jupiter, and that's going to really unlock a lot of information about these ocean worlds that we've been waiting to understand. We've just getting started over the last year or so more seriously on the Mars sample return mission. A campaign, really. It's a series of different missions. It's a follow-on to the Perseverance rover, which is collecting samples on Mars as we speak. And so the sample return campaign is a technologically challenging set of missions, but will ultimately bring these samples back to the Earth. And this has been an agency objective for us for a long time, decades and decades. There were Mars sample return studies in the 1980s. And so it's with the launch and the successful landing and surface operations of Perseverance, we're finally getting that started. And then there's a host of other missions that we're supporting that are going to the moon. It's an exciting time at JPL.
On the flip side of that, for the new incoming director, what are some of the key challenges at the strategic level? Relations with NASA, relations with Caltech and campus. What are some challenges that you see in the future?
I think that there's always an opportunity to improve our relationships with our sponsors. Lori is clearly, well suited to that. She's spent time in DC, and she understands how that relationship can operate efficiently. I think we're coming out of a global pandemic, and we have things like supply chain challenges that we need to be aware of, and we'll need to deal with logistically. We have a whole new way of working, all of us. I mean, right now we're talking, in a way that we wouldn't have a couple of years ago if we were doing an interview. And I think that that presents a challenge for the laboratory relative to, its workforce and how it wants to interact with especially the next generation of laboratory engineers and scientists and leaders. I think those are some of the big challenges that are still coming. I think also one of the things we found is the laboratory is very, very busy. It has a certain set of capabilities that are hard to find, anywhere else. And so we get more than enough work. And we try to do what we can when we're asked to do particular jobs, but there'll always be a challenge. There's going to be a challenge in the near term and over the medium term, I think, in dealing with the volume of work and making sure that we can maintain our levels, our standards, and our commitments to our stakeholders. So those are all the things that plenty of challenges out there for us.
Matt, a few questions about your own path and background. First, with your background in systems engineering and electrical engineering, do you see your role as an engineer as affecting your managerial and administrative responsibilities? In other words, is your work different than if you were a planetary scientist, for example, in terms of your overall responsibilities currently?
I think so. I mean, I think the fact that I have an engineering background that I have used, in this business now for 30 years or so, makes me more suited for certain types of leadership roles, and less suited for certain types of leadership roles. But certainly, I think that the technical strength of the people, whether it's in the sciences or whether it's in electrical engineering or propulsion engineering, that laboratory leaders can bring to the table is one of the things that really makes JPL very unique. I mean, I worked in industry and I was in the military, and one of the things that really is powerful capability that we bring to the table is the ability to integrate that technical depth and strength and understanding with our leadership positions. And it's interesting because I occasionally hear people talk about, managers need to manage and technical people need to manage, need to make the technical decisions. And there'll always be people bent in one direction or the other. But I find that the most effective people, and I encourage this in all of the leadership that I've ever worked with or have worked with me, I think the most effective people are the people that are not afraid to marry those two things together. And I think that's what allows us to do things at JPL that other organizations can't do. So I think it's a critical piece of who we are and what we do.
And in your current position, are you able to act as an engineer in the day-to-day, or are your responsibilities at this point more administrative, managerial?
Yeah, excuse me one second. Let me shut this door.
Sure.
It's surprisingly some of both.
Uh-huh.
There's certainly a part of my job that is not technically oriented, where I don't, it's a lot more about communication and interactions with people and strategic planning and things like that. But an enormous fraction of what I do is still about dealing with technical challenges. And so I do actually, I keep sort of expecting, I've expected my whole career to sort of elevate to a point where I don't use those skills, or I'm not, they're not as important. And I've never hit that point. I still find myself, I was looking through mass equipment lists yesterday, which not something I do very often, but occasionally I still have to do it. And so surprisingly, I think I still get to exercise those muscles.
And within JPL, if there's such a thing as a normal day to you, what are the meetings like, first of all, with your direct reports, the key people that are most important for you executing your mission?
Yeah, well, it's changed over time. I mean, in my current role, there's a typical day would be a couple meetings, standard meetings, periodic meetings, weekly meetings, if you will, that I have with the project management leadership for our key projects. And then there'll be, there's always the up and out sort of reporting opportunities to both our headquarters sponsors and to the laboratory leadership. So not unusual to have some of those meetings scheduled. I do find that I need to step back and look occasionally more strategically at the, for instance, the directorate budget, or the technology tasks that we have going on. So again, not all that unusual for me to be getting briefed or providing some feedback on that portfolio that we have in the directorate. And then there's always a part of the week that seems to be geared towards future work, where we're looking at proposals that are coming down the pike. So that's a good fraction of what I do. Here and there, I'll have one-on-one meetings, which I like a lot, with a junior engineer or a young manager that's looking for advice. I had one of those yesterday. Somebody looking for the next job and want to understand a good career path and what kind of opportunities there might be coming down the pike. And so I try to always make time for those as well.
Matt, I'm curious in what ways the proximity and relationship to Caltech is an asset for your work, either from students, professors, PIs, just having that intellectual connection. What does the Caltech relationship mean to you specifically on a day-to-day level?
I think there's some very specific things that happen as a result of that relationship, and then I think there's some things that are a little more intangible that are uh, nonetheless as or more impactful than than the specifics. I mean, the specifics are that we can draw from a talent pool, for future employees. I mean, I came out of Caltech to work at JPL, and there's that's a great connection to bring in talent, whether it's engineers or scientists. Many of our project scientists and project and co-Is and things like that are Caltech professors, and so there's an enormous opportunity for us to cross talk across that interface, and really we gain a lot of strength in our missions because of that relationship. Obviously, the fact that we're an FFRDC is a very important and critical characteristic for JPL. All those things I mentioned before, all those things we do well, all that interest we have in various types of work, a lot of that comes because of the flexibility that we have, being an FFRDC, and the way Caltech runs JPL, I think they're both very engaged and knowledgeable, and yet, understand that JPL is a different organization than an academic, organization like Caltech. I think there's a recognition because of the relationship is so long. I think that works very well. I think those are all very specific things. There's definitely an intangible aspect to this where when you can walk around JPL and it feels more like a campus, right? Than anything else. I think that's part of it. And I think the mindset very much for the people on laboratory is much more associated with an academic mindset, a level of curiosity, a level of independence, a level of individualism, a level of collaboration. People at JPL don't care if they're collaborating with, Europeans, or whether they're collaborating with Canadians, or if they're collaborating with, high school students. I mean, if the collaboration is valuable to the job that they're doing, or the questions that they're asking, or the technology they're developing, they're ready to do it. And I think that's very much influenced by our connection to the academic aspects of Caltech. So I think it's a very powerful, very important, connection. I think it's a model that, a lot of government organizations would be well suited to follow.
Matt, I'm curious, beyond Caltech, NASA in general, either at headquarters, other NASA research centers, or other FFRDCs, if there are counterparts or peers that are really important for you that you're in touch with on some regular basis.
Let's see. So, relative to headquarters, for instance, there certainly are. Our structure at JPL with the different directorates is actually kind of mirrored, or maybe we mirror headquarters in many ways. And so our directorate has, we have counter points in the headquarters organization that we're constantly in communication with. In our case, it's the Planetary Sciences division of the Science Mission Directorate, and so that is certainly the most important, external relationship that we have in what I'm doing. There's other types of work. There's what we call reimbursable government work that we do at the laboratory where there's ties into other government organizations, for instance, and those are critical, relationships again for other parts of the lab. But for planetary, the most important really are the ones into the science mission director at NASA headquarters, and then there's a host of other science organizations that are out there that we're connected into, because our missions are science missions. To 90%, 90% of them are in fact science missions, and so we need to stay connected into the science organizations that support planetary sciences, whether it's outer planets or whether it's Mars exploration, or whether it's Venus. We try to stay tightly coupled into those organizations.
Matt, a very in the headlines news kind of question. With the crisis in Ukraine right now, from anything ranging from space diplomacy to supply chain issues to national security, is JPL affected, or do you see in the long term JPL or even your work being affected by what's unfolding in Ukraine right now?
It is, yeah, and it's going to be, I think, moving into the future. I don't work in the sort of defense support domains of the laboratory, but you could obviously imagine there being longer term implications on those programs and those technologies and those sorts of things. But for me, in the present tense, we're already seeing some ramifications of what's been happening in the Ukraine. We do a lot of collaborative work with the European Space Agency and with the different European countries' space agencies, and they, for instance, collaborate with Russia. Have collaborated with Russia and continue to collaborate with Russia, just as our space agency has, relative to access to the space station and launchers and things like that. And so, as a matter of fact, the one of the programs that we are involved in Europe is a program called ExoMars, and there was a Mars rover, ExoMars rover. The name of it's Rosalind Franklin, and it was scheduled to be launched this year. And it was a collaborative. We were providing some science instruments and some other pieces of engineering components, and we have also helped them with certain technologies and things like that. But in general, that was a collaboration between the European Space Agency and Russia, and so that, as you can imagine, that collaboration is transitioning, to say the least, and that will have implications on that program, and that program then could domino into other collaborations that we have with ESA, including the Mars sample return. They're a big player in our sample return activities. They're providing an orbiter that's going to rendezvous with the samples in orbit around Mars and bring it back to the Earth. They are also providing what's called a fetch rover, which goes out and picks up the samples and brings them back to the lander, where we have the Mars Ascent vehicle. So yeah, we're already seeing and hearing about these potential implications, and we'll have to react to them.
Another current question, although this one is a little more broadened out, of course, commercial spaceflight and space exploration seems to be becoming a bigger deal by the day. So for planetary science at JPL, NASA in general, where do you see companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic? Where is their collaboration? Where is their cooperation? And where is there simply a divergence of missions where there really isn't much shared space?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the probably the most impactful area so far for us has just been the cost of space access. The launch vehicle competition that's happened over the last decade has changed the way, obviously had very positive impacts on total mission and life cycle costs by reducing the cost of getting those kilograms up into, off the Earth. But they've also started to change the way we think about some of our systems, in that, whereas before we'd spend a lot of money saving every kilogram, or gram in some cases, with the cost dropping with the competition that's out there, we have more flexibility in the way we go about building and designing systems. I think that's one immediate that's happening now, across the board. Um, I think the agency is, clearly wants to leverage that commercial interest and capability, beyond just the launch vehicle side of this. Crew access obviously has been one great example of that. We're starting to see that with lunar exploration. There's a series of commercial lunar landers that have been essentially lined up. We're part of that in that we some of the science packages that are going to go on those landers, for instance, would be developed at JPL. And so there's an opportunity, I think, in the lunar domain, for that type of collaboration and leveraging off of the different strengths between industry and and what we do in the agency. I think there's no question that over some period of time, uh, you know, just like the Dutch East India Company, right? I mean, eventually, the commercial, the the engine of commercialization will create opportunities for outer planets and solar system body, concepts and missions. Those are coming. I mean, they're still hard missions. They still require a lot of infrastructure and a lot of investment. And so there's a natural progression to get there, but I do believe that's all part of the future for us, and I think it's a terrific thing. I mean, I think it allows us to leverage the marketplace and all those marketplace forces into doing a better job of exploring for science and other reasons.
And on that
So
point specifically, what does the commercial sector now or is projected to do in the future? What do they do simply better or more economically that frees up JPL to play on its strengths?
depending on how the commercial organization gets structured and funded and things like that, one of the things that uh, I think it's easier for them to do is to fail.
Mm-hmm.
And that may sound like a weird thing to say,
No, it
but
makes sense.
you know, failure is what creates success ultimately, right?
Right.
It's the innovation and it's the learning process. Um, we're very good. We're the best in the world, when it comes to organizing and managing big, complex, multi-organizational, strategic, campaigns and efforts. The United States and our industrial base is unparalleled. Nobody can do it, and JPL is part of that, right? I mean, we do some of the most complex missions, and we do them the first time, and we do them right, and we're really, really good at that. But not every not every activity and every objective is well matched to that model, and I think that Um, I think that there's a lot of value in having a construct that allows for the opportunity to fail, and without devastating consequences, right? Without the world watching, or without you know something really unrecoverable happening. And so again, you can't do that when you're launching Mars Perseverance. You can't do that when you're launching James Webb Space Telescope, right? These things are too big, too complex. There's no trial and error here. They're too expensive, and but there are plenty of places where that model works, and it works very well. And I think that's one of the places industry is has a leg up.
Matt, it's probably as much a philosophical as it is a science and engineering approach, but if you listen to the founding mission of, say, SpaceX versus Blue Origin, where Blue Origin very much looks at space exploration as enhancing life on planet Earth, and SpaceX is more about we need a plan B for humanity. That seems to be more the emphasis. Speaking just for yourself, not trying to represent JPL in its entirety, I'm just curious, given your deep experience thinking and working on about Mars so much, where you might fall on that spectrum.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, typically when they talk about exploration, they're talking about human exploration,
Right.
I think. And so I'll answer, in that context. I've primarily done robotic exploration my whole career, but I get asked this question a lot because every time I go and talk somewhere, people ask the question, and it just goes, I think, to show that no matter how capable our robotic systems are, there will always be this fundamental interest in human space exploration. And I think they're very synergistic. And I think one needs the other in robotic and human exploration. So sort of as a context for this question, I'll say that. And I think both types of exploration, enhance our lives here on the Earth. I mean, in many, many ways. Obviously, just the technological advances that are created, by the need to do these missions that can then be applied commercially, whether it's GPS or materials or whatever. That's one advantage. I think there's also obviously an advantage just in stimulating and inspiring people in these technological areas, STEM and all of that. And that's very hard to put a price tag on, but it's enormously important for our country and for us as a society to continue to advance. So I think, I think exploration of all kinds brings both those advantages. I guess I'll also say that I've kind of come around to very often the question is asked in the context of, well, how can we justify spending all this money, whether independent of whether it's to help, the technologies, build these technologies for space, or whether it's to ultimately provide a pathway for humans to leave, the Earth if they need to, as sort of a second habitat, if you will. Independent of that, people often ask the question, why are we spending money to do these things when we have so many problems here? We were just talking about the Ukraine, right? COVID, right? I mean, it's cancer. I mean, it's always, very often the question's asked in that context. And I've always had the list of advantages, that it provides, but I have really come to the conclusion that the answer to the question actually isn't all that important, strangely enough, because we're going to do it anyway. It's just It's just what we do. It's in
As
our
humans, you
DNA.
mean?
As humans, yeah, we're going to explore. We're going to go to places we haven't been. We're going to try to answer questions that are fundamental and that we don't understand. And in that sense, I think uh, you can argue the SpaceX model is a little more fundamental to our nature, right? Which is that it's going to happen, and it's going to happen because it's just what we do. Whether or not we fund it this way or we fund it that way, or whether the objective is to help people here, or whether the objective is to create an outpost for humans in the event that we mess this one up. so, so I don't know. I've kind of come around after all this time to feeling like the motivation and the benefit part of it is uh, it's. I mean, we can have that conversation for a very long time, but in the end, it's just going to happen. So we're going to go to Mars, where there's going to be people on Mars. It's going to happen. Question of one.
On that point, the limiting factors, given all that you've learned with your focus on robotic missions, exploring Mars, where is the hype and where is the reality when people talk about terraforming Mars, establishing colonies on Mars? What does all of that look like to you?
Well, from everything, again, I'm not an expert in this area, but from everything I read, the terraforming, is a very long term sort of objective. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities. The resources we know exist. There's water, there's subsurface water, there's water ice at the poles. You can envision different ways of that happening, but these things happen on a very long time scale, as you know, and so it's interesting on 1,000-year time scale to have that conversation. But I don't, and I'm sure there are people out there, that experts, that might tell me I'm wrong. But to me, that in my mind, that's where that exists. I think outposts on Mars, though, other types of outposts on Mars are uh, are definitely near term things that can be talked about. The agency to the First Order would like to see human exploration at Mars in the 2030s. That's a very aggressive time scale, I will tell you, based on my experience of putting robots on Mars. It's not an easy planet to uh, put things down on the surface of. It's big enough that it has a lot of gravity, like the Earth. Unlike the Moon, where you can just kind of come down nice and slow. It's going to pull you down, and if you don't do something to stop yourself, you're going to crash and you're going to crater. So that makes it hard. But unlike the Earth, there's not enough atmosphere to slow yourself down with things like parachutes and heat shields and things like that. And so while you see Apollo capsules returning to the Earth on the parachutes, you can't do that on Mars. And the bigger the system, the harder it gets. You need retropropulsion. You need propulsion or some other means of really slowing yourself down in a pretty big way. And so it's a hard planet to land on. The biggest payload we put down is a 1 metric ton rover. And human exploration is going to require 40, 60 metric tons, probably minimum, at a time. So it's difficult, and that's of course before you get to the physiological challenges of being in space over long periods of time, and not to mention the psychological challenges of these long duration space flights. So, but technology wise, we can do it, and we can create, whether it's surface or whether it's subsurface habitats. It might be subsurface for radiation reasons and things like that. I mean, that's on a time scale that at least my daughter can think about. Yeah.
It's intangible, but I wonder where you would rank the search for life in the broader, as you say, it's in our DNA. We're going to search, we're going to discover. of all of the motivating factors that pull us into space, Mars in particular, where do you rank this question about is there life outside of planet Earth, which remains a big question mark, of course. Where do you rank that among all of the reasons to go to a place like Mars?
Well, we're looking for life, ancient life on Mars, and we're looking for the possibility of even extant life in other places around the solar system. And of course, there's exoplanet, technologies coming down the road that will help us understand habitability of planets and outside our own solar system. Those are all aspects of searching for life, and I think they are fundamental, transformative questions for us as a species, as humans. I think it will change. Just you think about the impact of Copernicus, for instance, when he, as we began to understand that the universe didn't revolve around the Earth, but we revolved. We orbited this thing, the sun, and it decentralized our perspective of ourselves, and it did have philosophical and religious and other implications, I think, on us as in a societal way. I think the question of did life exist, or does life exist somewhere other than the Earth, is in the same category. I think it's a, like I said, transformative type of shift in the way we think about ourselves and about the universe. And so, and I think it's something that fascinates. It fascinates not just people like me that are in the business, or not just astrobiologists, but when you go and you talk to people, they want to hear.
Everyone wonders. Everyone.
Yeah, they want to hear about the geology of Mars and things like that. But what they really want to know is there life there? Was there life there? And that's part of that motivation, that drive that I was talking about. That's just, as you said, part of our DNA is, and I think it's a critically important thing. And I've changed my perspective, I have to say, over time on the question, on the possibility. Let me say it that way. As when I was in school taking biology 40 years ago, we didn't have anywhere near the kind of understanding of the ancient, molecular processes and the evolutionary processes that we do now. Genetics has really changed in many ways what we understand about how life forms and how evolution happens and everything else. And when you step back and you look now at how evolution works, I've kind of gone from it's unlikely that Mars probably ever had, it's a barren, arid, place with radiation environments and no magnetic field to protect it, and things like that, to really believing that because the environment existed on Mars billions of years ago, it would have been very hard to stop life from happening. And so I am fascinated by it personally, and I think it's a really important question. Now, I think we'll be able to answer it.
To clarify your phrasing, in Mars you're looking for ancient life, and elsewhere in the solar system we're looking for extant life. Is that to say that the search for current life, even in its microbial form on Mars, is sort of on pause right now?
I think when you talk to the science community, in general, the conditions that would have supported the evolution of life really existed primarily, 3-4 billion years ago on Mars. That was a point where the Martian core was active, so there was a magnetic field protecting you from galactic radiation. There was the surface of the planet was wet, it was warm, it had an atmosphere. It looked a lot like the Earth did 3.5 billion years ago. It really, really did. And when you're on the surface, there's an energy source. The sun provides that energy source. And so you had many of the components that you need for life under that scenario. And so that's really the focus for Mars. It's the ancient environment. And that's a tough thing to tease apart, because the processes, all the planetary processes that happen over billions of years, tend to destroy these long chain organics, these signatures, what we call biosignatures of life. And so you're looking for these really faint traces, these telltales of signals. And it's very, very hard to do. You need extremely sensitive equipment. And we've kind of concluded that we can't take sensitive equipment that is sensitive enough to Mars. We need to bring this Mars back to the Earth to do that, and that's really the motivation for sample return. You're looking for parts per billion, or maybe even lower. Trace organic, signatures, and those are tough things to find. So that's what this. That's really the focus for Mars.
And just to give a sense of scale, so in the way that we know exploration of our own ocean floors, we've barely scratched the depths, if you will, of our own planet, given how difficult it is to go down there. If you can give a sense of the uncharted territory that we haven't even begun to look at on Mars. We've had, amazing success getting rovers to Mars, but what have they been able to probe relative to the sheer size of the planet, not to mention the fact that they're literally just scratching the surface?
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple different domains, if you will, of thought with respect to that question. One is that we have found, based on the whatever it is, 7 sites or whatever we've gotten to on Mars, that Mars is, despite what it looks like in pictures, it's very heterogeneous. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Much more so than you might think. You go to one place and all you see are igneous rocks that are formed by volcanic, activity. You go to another place and all you see are sedimentary rocks. And you see different chemical compositions depending on, the history of the water and the volcanic history and the geological, context of all these things. And so I think diversity-wise, one of the things we have to recognize is that we may or we may not go to the best place to search for life. I think one of the probably underlooked and most powerful sort of collaborative events that have happened on Mars exploration is between the orbiter systems that are mapping the entire globe from orbit, at a certain resolution with certain types of spectrometry and certain type of imagery and certain types of, instruments, and then the ground truth by tying together this orbital data sets, which are global, to very specific ground truth from rover systems or lander systems. We've gotten quite good at interpreting our orbital data. And so that's one of the reasons why Perseverance went to Jezero, is because we looked at what we saw at Gale, we looked at what we saw at Gusev, we looked at what we saw at Meridiani, and we tied those back into the orbiter science data sets. And we were then able to extrapolate forward and say, okay, if we're looking for life and we think we need these characteristics, Jezero is the place to go. And it's the best place to go that we can get to. And so I think we've made a lot of progress there. I think although we're actually on the surface at a tiny fraction of the surface area of the planet, I think we've gotten pretty good actually at selecting sites that are valuable scientifically, that have high promise for the types of signatures we're looking for. So that's one area we've made good progress in. I would say the subsurface, domain is a place we have not yet really. We know there's subsurface water, but it's deep and it's only in certain locations. Those may be places where that we want to ultimately get to, and then there's also an aspect of the subsurface that makes it more valuable in some ways, which is that it has not been bombarded by UV radiation for tens of millions of years, which does have a tendency to break down some of these chemical systems. And so when you subsurface sample, if you go deep enough, you can potentially find chemical and molecular signatures that you wouldn't find on the surface. So that's probably an area that that's still open for improving our access to. We do try to take account of that by coring. For instance, Perseverance is not just taking a surface sample, it's actually coring into rocks to get below that surface. And so we do try to account for that. We also look at the context of the stratigraphy of where we land, and we try to go to places that have not been exposed for 50 million years, that have been uncovered, within a reasonable geological time frame, so that it was protected from radiation, and trying to understand that. I think so we do try to compensate for that, but I do think the subsurface domain, with deep enough drills and things like that, is still a rich area to go and look. And then the poles, we've managed to get into the, towards the poles, but it's a difficult place to operate, as you might imagine, just like it is on the Earth. And so those are probably some of the opportunities that are still open for, new exploration and finding new things. One of the other things I'll just mention briefly is, as you probably know, Perseverance carried an Ingenuity helicopter.
Right.
And we carried it as a technology demonstration. It was supposed to fly 5 times and show that it could fly, but it's still fine. We just finished our 20th flight. And we're now using it for science reasons, science sorties. We're going out into places in Jezero Crater where we can't send rovers because it's too rough and too rugged. And it is providing the science team with valuable data that we wouldn't otherwise have. So there's mission concepts that provide aerial reconnaissance into places, into deep ravines or large crater walls, or elevations, mountains and things like that we can't get rovers into. So there's an opportunity to explore those places too.
What depths are our current drills capable of going to on Mars? How deep into the ground can we get right now?
We're just scratching this. I mean, the drill that the Perseverance carries will core down to about 8 centimeters, so 2.5, 3 inches. That's as deep as we go. I'm not quite sure Insight and Phoenix, they did do some trenching, and we can trench with the wheels. So, maybe 6 inches or so. But that's not very deep. You want to get many meters down. And so I mentioned earlier the ExoMars rover that the Europeans have built. They have actually built a subsurface drill. And I don't know exactly how deep it goes, but it's, I think it's on the order of half a meter or so. So that's one of the science objectives of that rover.
Where I'm going with this, of course, is at least anecdotally, on planet Earth, you really have to dig pretty far down to get to some interesting stuff. I mean, it's a relatively recent development that human civilization even became aware of dinosaurs from being able to dig. Just theoretically, I mean, is it naive to think that if we ever get serious drilling equipment on Mars, that there might be a whole world of life well below the surface beyond what we're capable of getting to now?
I think that if you're looking for extant life, if you're looking for life that's there now, then no, I don't think it's naive to think that. I think that's where you want to go and look at the subsurface water and ice regions. I think that probably is the game changer for extant life. Yeah.
Now, beyond Mars, the excitement for extant life in our solar system, where are you focused right now? Where are most of the resources based on the theory and the assumptions that we might have life now in our solar system beyond Earth?
I think the next sort of target is the ocean worlds, and these tend to be the moons on the bigger gas giant planets. And so again, I mentioned Europa. That's really the next target for us as a laboratory in that area. We know that there are oceans on the planet, and we know there's ice caps, and we know that there are occasional plumes and things like that. And we've had some flyby information, but we really need to better understand that those systems, I think, and we need to send systems that can that are tailored to specifically go to those places with the right instrumentation and can repeatedly observe them. Like Europa, which is going to do, I think, on the order of 50 or so flybys on Europa as part of a prime mission. So that's the next place to look inside the solar system.
But to clarify, Europa is a flyby mission. It's not going to actually land on the satellite.
That's right. Yeah. So we use the term flyby typically to mean it just goes by once. Mm-hmm. We'll use the term orbiter, if you will, to which is usually when we talk about orbiters, it's orbiting a planet or something. But in this case, yeah, there's going to be multiple passes, if you will, over Europa at different heights and things like that to get that data.
Just thinking about Europa, all of the PIs, all of the instruments that need to be coordinated on this one large piece of equipment. For you and your administrative roles, what kind of quarterbacking do you need to do to make sure that all of the different PIs, all of the technologies, everybody's working in concert?
Well, I'll start by saying that we have a tremendously experienced and capable set of project leadership and project scientists on Europa. And so certainly comparable to my experience level. And so, they do 98% of the work themselves. At this stage of the development, my primary function is to look to see where they're struggling and to see if there's resources or institutional priorities or organizational relationships, that need attention. As you can imagine, I mean, it's a mission with 10 complex science instruments. and it's a mission that intends to try to operate all those science instruments concurrently, which makes it even harder. It's operating in a very aggressive radiation environment. It's a long duration mission, and so there's lifetime, questions that or challenges and qualifications and things like that that have to get dealt with. It's got a lot of organizational contributors. We have a big partnership with the Applied Physics Lab for Europa, and so I see my job as on Europa at this stage of their development as looking for the places where they need some help, and just trying to help plug the holes and ask, find out where they need some additional resources or priority calls. There is they do and they do need to do a lot of coordination among the different organizations and instruments and experiments and all of that. So it's complicated. And as we get closer to launch, and certainly after launch, as we get closer to the encounter and all of that, that'll ramp up in a big, big way.
Just to conceptualize 10 highly complex scientific instruments hurtling through space on a flyby mission that doesn't even land. What do we expect to learn about Europa that we don't currently know?
I think, again, this is outside my domain of expertise, but what we're hoping to understand is the constituency of the oceans. I think they want to understand the thickness of the ice cap. I think they want to understand, the nature of the surface features and the dynamics of the ocean, the surface, aspects of the ocean. There are science objectives associated with, understand the constituencies of plumes, and so all of those things are targets here for Europa.
Do you see it in historical terms as essentially a reconnaissance mission for an eventual rover mission to Europa or other ocean world satellites?
I think it is a mission that is I think it is a standalone mission in and of itself. I think the hope here is that the amount of science that we get back would justifies the mission without any follow-on mission. Having said that, there are Europa lander concepts that the laboratory has been working on for quite a while, and would like to pair. They're difficult, they don't land it on something that far away. But that technology work is still ongoing. And so, I think hopefully there's an opportunity to do that in the future.
And to go back to the question about searching for extant life in the solar system, is there any chance that the Europa mission will get us that much closer to a sense of whether there's life on Europa?
I think so. Yeah. I think we should think of Europa as in that way. The instruments are very much designed to help us understand, the system and the moon in that sense. So I do, I think it was Carl Sagan that said extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. Exactly how far down that extraordinary proof, domain we get, I think is something I'm not sure I can speak to necessarily, but I think it will give us strong indications of whether or not we're looking at something that could be habitable for life. Yeah.
Matt, the idea that there are concept missions that visualize or envision a rover mission on Europa, with your expertise in Mars, what are some of the obvious technical challenges, new ways of doing things where Mars rovers might not necessarily provide a game plan?
Um, I think that the Europa landers have a number of technologies that required that don't exist. I mean, one good example is autonomy. You know, we can communicate with things on Mars. I mean, it may sound like it takes a long time, but you know, it's a 10-minute light time. You know, so over the course of a you know we can provide daily updates or multiple updates over the course of a day as far as mission objectives and sequencing and commanding sets and things like that. But on Europa, obviously that's a lot tougher given the distances. And so autonomy is a big technological challenges for systems that are trying to operate that far away from the Earth. That's one example of a technology that needs to be matured for Europa.
What about
and radiation?
Temperatures?
The radiation environment, obviously, as well is a fundamentally different from Mars.
What about temperatures? I presume it's extraordinarily cold there.
Yeah, I do not know the temperature. I do not know the surface temperature profile on Europa. I just haven't been engaged on the lander systems and concepts at a level where I know. Mars gets very cold, because of the diurnal cycle. It'll get down to minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit right at night. And so the Martian systems have to deal with very cold environments. And there is, because of the gravitational interactions between Jupiter and Europa, there is an energy, if you will. There are certain factors that, for instance, keep the ocean from freezing all the way through and things like that. So I don't know exactly what the surface conditions are relative to Mars.
Matt, even farther in our solar system, talking about things that the public is really engaged about, was Planetary Science at all involved in the question about whether Pluto is really a planet? Does it have an institutional response to that, given the fact that so much of this decision-making went on at Caltech?
That was a little before my time. I don't think I'm qualified to answer. And even if I were, I'm not sure I would, given the emotion surrounding the question. I am perfectly happy to call it a planet. Yeah.
Matt, what about beyond our solar system? Is your directorate involved in exoplanet research?
No, that comes from a different part of the laboratory. So we stay, inside the solar system.
What I mean, from both an administrative and a scientific perspective, what would mandate that distinction for exoplanets, which obviously they're planets?
Oh, you're saying why? I think the fundamental reason is the technologies needed to do that are just very different from what we do to. I mean, to the first order, obviously you need spectroscopy and you need, systems that are operate in space and all of that. But a lot of what is done, in that domain is done in, with these cryogenic systems that are looking at very sensitive, UV and IR and other things that with big telescopes or interferometry. Those are things that are somewhat outside the field of technologies that we typically use for the planetary exploration. And so there's a logical distinction there.
Do you see technologies that have developed within your directorate as providing a boost, given essentially how young exoplanet research is as a field?
I think so. I haven't given it too much thought. I mean, yeah, again, to the first order, we all care about, uh, almost every telescope system has mechanisms in it, and we all care about long life mechanisms in space and how to create those and manage them. We all care about, we all have a lot of deployment systems. I mean, these big, uh, 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 telescopes and things like that are deployed in space have large sunshades and aperture doors and things like that. And so, to the first order, we care about understanding how to engineer those types of things. The sensitivity of imaging focal planes is going to help no matter what you're trying to do with that focal plane. I think the processing power is important no matter whether you're using it to autonomously drive a rover on Mars or whether you're using it to do some onboard data compression of science information. So yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, there's plenty of crossover technologies, but the way in which they get packaged and applied is, like I said, I mean, it's kind of a different set of science objectives to the first order, which is why they get separate.
Matt, last topic we'll touch on for today. One planet we haven't yet discussed in our solar system, of course, is Earth. And as you well know, JPL over the past 20 or 30 years has increasingly become a more important player in turning those those satellites toward us to learn more about our own planet. Where does the Directorate for Planetary Science fit in that overall mission at JPL to better understand planet Earth?
That's a great question. The Earth Sciences Directorate is a separate directorate. I mean, again, in part because of the science objective. The science communities are very different as well. So we're interacting with different science groups, but we have a lot of crosstalk with and a lot of collaboration, a lot of movement of people, across the border between these two areas, because they're, in both cases, we're dealing with, spacecraft, satellites, deep space spacecraft. They have many of the same functions and they do many of the same things. And so an orbiter around the Earth has a lot of similarity in some ways with an orbiter around Mars or around Europa, for instance. So there's a lot of we're working in many of the same domain areas, I guess I would say, and we're talking to many of the same technology groups. Radars are becoming increasingly important for, every time I turn around, we're finding a new radar application for sciences. And the same is very true for planetary sciences. We're sending a host of spacecraft actually are heading towards Venus in the next decade. One is Veritas, which we're the lead on, which has a radar on it. Another is Da Vinci, which is Goddard is leading, which of course has a radar on it. And the third is a European spacecraft, which has a radar that we're building on it. So I think I think there's a lot of applicable crossover there in technology.
Finally, Matt, last question for today. If we can turn out all of the administrative and the Zoom meetings and stuff like that, just as a snapshot in time, circa March 2022, what's most interesting to you? What are you working on right now where you're really moving the ball forward for your directorate?
Yeah, so many different places. I mentioned Venus. We haven't been there in quite a while, and that's actually a pretty exciting it's just re-energizing that entire science community. I think that's going to be exciting for everybody. Um, Sample return is a very engaging program, and it's one that we're not doing, as I mentioned before, on our own. This is a complex, multi-organizational, programmatic endeavor. It really is, you know, a pretty epic space campaign, and so I think that's very challenging and very engaging, for us. Uh, and I'm excited by all the interest that we continue to get, in planetary sciences, and I'm also excited. Um, I think there's a stronger uh, motivation now to do more of the types of things we did in the 60s with human precursor type work, when we went to the moon with Surveyor and things like that as a precursor in the Apollo regime. I think some of the work we're doing in Mars, for instance, has very much that flavor. We carried a oxygen generation technology experiment on Perseverance where we were ingesting the carbon dioxide atmosphere and creating pure oxygen for both, life support and for oxidizer for fuel to get back from the planet. So that's a forward-looking human exploration type of thing. We are engaged more and more on these lunar systems, which again I think is really a precursor for the Artemis campaign of sending humans back to the moon. So that's an exciting part of what we're doing in the directorate. All those things there's so many. So just every time you look in one direction, it's something new and interesting.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah, it is.
All right. On that note, Matt, we'll pick up for next time.